Welcome back to my channel, Starboot.
Have you ever believed that the kindest of spirits that were believed to possess a heart as fragile like a flower that blazed for human misery would become so brutal that the entire Church of Christ would implore him to halt his planned action? See this video through to the end to learn. Luis Antonio, what a wonderful announcement Tagle created following his devastating finding, and the reason why so many of the powers around the world want him dead. Antonio Luis Tagle is frequently characterized as kind, compassionate, knowledgeable, and has in some way become among the most discussed leaders in the Catholic world. A few admire him as a potential saint, whereas others claim he is the smiling assassin from the Vatican, who's reorganizing authority in such a way that even your angelic guardians wouldn't be aware of it. Something is taking place. His birthplace was Manila in 1957. Along with Luis Antonio Tagle, grew up in a pious Catholic home where there was a strong sense of faith and the food was even more potent. His Chinese ancestry, which he doesn't talk about much, most likely due of the crazy background, provided him with a distinct culturalens. It was viewed as a diplomatic bridge by some to China. Others thought this was the reason. He was finally sidelined. His ascent, something out of the ordinary, passed through the church. Fiction. By the age of 25, the boy was enrolled in Rome under influential theologians such as, according to reports, Joseph Kamanchek once claimed that Tagle's intellect was so acute that able to cut paper. As they say, you get lots of adversaries as you take action unconventional. Thus, when he composed his dissertation for a doctorate on episcopal collegiality, many people rejected it as they perceived it as a subdued protest against Vatican authority. Therefore, why would Pope, the custodian of the Vatican, Benedict XIII 16th Tagle, should be appointed as 2011 Archbishop of Manila? Was it theological congruence or divine motivation? To discover out, wait a little while. To what's one of the most talked about regarding Luis Antonio Tagle's paradoxes? He is both conservative and progressive. Admire him in some way. He's incredibly sentimental, such as the time he sobbed at a funeral service on misplaced Tupperware. However, he also made dubious calculations in the Philippines. He wasn't merely popular, he was worshipped. His Sunday sermons were aired over the country, attracting audiences that could opposing K-pop fandoms. Tagle was present. Tagle shoes, Tagle mugs, and calendars all over. Not everyone merely listened. Too, they cried through his sermons, holding tissues and rosaries. And his face was beaming across every in the living room. A more subdued drama was taking place backstage. Behind them, smiles and soft laughs, Tagle suffered severe injuries, not only from the world's suffering, but based on what he was looking inside the actual church. He was posing risky queries regarding the way the Vatican handled a scandal and financial wrongdoing. His detractors referred to Neve, claiming that he was too gentle to survive Roman Curia's blood sport, the game of politics in which kindness is frequently confused with weakness. Insiders, however, provide a very different story. Narrative. Tagle didn't have no idea. He wassilantly creating spreadsheets in the mind, recording names and identifying patterns. In essence, he was the kindest warlord in the Vatican who was acting, like at the time, a church detective. Why, but did he do that? Every single one of the in 2015, inquiries were addressed when he was given the keys by Pope Francis to the church's Carus Internationale, his worldwide humanitarian arm. That's when things began to shift. As Tagle visited Syrian refugee camps and detonated Mumbai and South Sudanese villages, slums that are more spiritual than sanitary, his eyes widened. He observed what he wasn't intended to, corrupted individuals and beneath which the financial empire was built. He wasn't merely present to bestow the suffering and posing for fashionable pictures from Instagram. No, as one Caritas staffer needed, receipts, so he leaked actual receipts. At this point, rumors started to circulate that Tagle was being seen by adversaries and allies alike. In 2019, saw his appointment by Pope Francis. Congregations perfect for the people's evangelization was much like the foreign policy of the Vatican overseer of missionary territories. While some saw it as a promotion, others as a state of exile. Ultimately, the role comes with a great deal of responsibility, yet very little actual power. Nevertheless, Tagle took the position seriously. He crossed the world with an emphasis on developing countries, especially those in Asia and Africa. However, what he found in those locations that would push him and destroy his heart, reaching a conclusion that would surprise even his closest advisors. He started identifying alarming indicators, abuse of mission money, concealed beneath layers of bureaucracy, and even meddling by the Vatican had political governments disregarded at a particular expense. What was that? Later on, you'll discover that in the film. However, the thing that caused him to begin working on this tract was his discoveries in China. Possessing roots, he had some leverage there, but it further revealed to him the truths he was never meant to. Be aware. What function did he part in the contentious agreement with the Vatican? With the Communist Party of China, one which detractors claim is sold out underground Catholics in return for political strength. Did that transaction result in the when? Did he name it his worst heartbreak? At least Tagle didn't say anything in public at the moment. However, those near, he observed a shift. He halted making jokes at meetings. He turned into retracted. He canceled his appearances. Without justification. Later, in late 2023, something took place. Vatican insiders claim Tagle faced a number of cardinals in a private meeting. There was no transcript released. Nevertheless, following the conference within weeks, he was dismissed as head of Caritas. It was formally referred to as airy structuring. Informally, it was seen as a form of discipline. What made Tagle truly gone? Then, as many believed his professional days were finished, Tagle made a public declaration that caught everyone off guard, one that alluded to his sorrow, but also his determination, a crusade, a call to action, or a challenge. However, what did he say specifically? Furthermore, who is attempting to halt him? Yes, it is a query that all of us find annoying. Additionally, by the video's conclusion, you will understand the absurd reality. Silence is said to be a sort of opposition. If that's the case, then the silence of Luis Antonio Tagle in late. There was no retreat in 2023. It was a declaration of war, as he stood in front of a crowded Manila cathedral within weeks upon their abrupt removal from. He didn't mention names. Caritas, not because he was unable to. The reason was because he must. He spoke in a thunderous tone. It shook the plains as it passed past. Hearts of every one of his adversaries when he stated, when love's objective turns into a exchange. When religion is utilized as money, the gospel becomes silent. The audience erupted, and the message was evident. Tagle wasn't finished. However, what does he mean by a transaction? Was he speaking regarding China, the Vatican's money, or something more profound? Perhaps he was referring to a betrayal in the leadership of the Church. Those who had kept a close eye on Tagle something had changed. We were all familiar with him as the person who never stopped grinning, cardinal, and cited texts such as poetry. However, in his place now stands a man who is obviously older, more seasoned, and fearless, some say. He had observed something. What was the question? To responds that we must return to the Vatican-China agreement. It was a suspicious 2018 saw the signing of an agreement that permitted the Chinese government to examine and bishops are appointed with the Pope's acceptance. For some, it was an essential make concessions to safeguard Catholics and China's sovereignty. For others, it was an agreement that sold their faith, and in the center of it was Tagle. Tagle, in spite of his origins, had always felt wary of interacting, yet with Chinese officials. According to sources, he told early Vatican authorities, "We're not engaging in conversation with the government. The system with which we are bargaining doesn't think that God exists," yet his warnings were dismissed. Next, he was sent to meet with Chinese officials in 2020, authorities in what was characterized as a pastoral visit. What took place behind those shuttered doors have never been revealed. However, soon after the visit, according to reports, Tagle ceased discussing China in the open. One insider from the Vatican disclosed that he returned altered, paler, calmer, as though he had investigated. He wished he hadn't done it. What the heck was he able to see? Did he find out that the priests operating underground were being jailed notwithstanding the agreement as according to the rumors? Or the reality that there were churches being destroyed, and that Vatican inaction on these blasphemous offenses had been purchased using political pledges? Was it worse, though, while helping the Church from the beginning system that it said it opposed? One hypothesis that has garnered significant backing. In according to recent months, the church money intended for the persecuted, there was smuggling of Chinese Catholics through phony organizations. And, according to some, this corruption was connected to state-run religious institutions in mainland China Affairs Office. And who was it that was inquiring excessively about everything of this? It was, you guessed it, Tagle. Was this the actual cause of his removal from Caritas? Ultimately, it wasn't just corruption that was permitted by the Church. Even atrocities against people were disregarded by the Church. Humanism for financial gain by the government. Everything deteriorated when Tagle started asking for thorough audits, assessments that, based on what a whistleblower would have done, those wearing red caps. However, it wasn't only China. Additionally, Tagle had argued with African bishops amid allegations of the disappearance of mission monies into private estates and high-end vehicles. He advocated for openness, demanding yearly financial statements. He was alleged by some of disrupting the domain of others or making unfounded accusations. Others referred to him as a divine man who was incapable of resist evil. However, the pressure continued to increase. With the rise in those who desired, Tagle is no longer there. Right when people believed there was no way things could get worse, a revelation revealed an internal memo that had been leaked. That stated, the Manila Cardinal has no idea what Roman diplomacy is. Another person viewed him as an adversary, by referring to him as a danger. To be more, according to the report, he is becoming liabilities. By the middle of 2023, Tagle's destiny behind closed doors, the decision was being made. A strong assembly of cardinals, frequently known as the Circle, started urging Pope Francis to take his place at Caritas. They contended that Tagle's projects were creating conflict and administrative misunderstanding. However, some believe the true cause was much more evil. Tagle had discovered an unfinished coded report that it was very old and connected a number of senior clergy to go offshore accounts. These were the reports that were purportedly employed to channel mission funds into private assets in Luxembourg and Switzerland. It happened at. This point was lost by the criminals. Terrified, and they all lost their minds. They began making calls anonymously, and they began making threats. Tagle. Leave this, one even cautioned, by yourself, or you'll be coming clean from a jail cell. Nevertheless, Tagle did not provide and continued to struggle against the evil in the Church. And his last internal communication as president of Caritas concluded with a disturbing statement. How can we communicate if we can't tidy our home of deliverance? And after a few days, he was gone. What do you think then? He was abandoned by everyone when he was being disconnected? Pope Francis did not desert, nor him. Francis actually declined to replace Tagle, openly resigned from his position. Unoccupied for some months. Was the Pope purchasing time? Was he keeping Tagle safe, or defending the Church from potential exposed? When the Pope was questioned regarding Francis simply stated, "Tagle's removal, distance is sometimes necessary for love." Then the campaign began. Tagle, in early 2024, restored the Shepherd's fire. Motion. It was a project that was intended to strengthen local dioceses and granting Catholics the authority to make demand, openness, diversity, and change. His initial remarks began with a heartbreaking inquiry. Who do you trust when the shepherds themselves have wolves' teeth? The crowd went quiet. The sheep's fangs ceased beating, and then there was a thunderclap. Just so you all understand that Tagle's movement is more than merely atheological. Pressure, it's a political issue. He's bringing thousands of ordinary people together throughout Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Bishops are offering assistance. Additionally, the startling thing is that some Jesuits' Rome has started to protect him. At least in secret. So, what do you consider? Does Tagle intend to submit a proposal for the Pope, or is he creating a path for another person? It's evident that he's greater sway outside of the Vatican walls as opposed to inside them. And maybe the point is that. Several months following the Shepherds Movement's relaunch, Tagle was the exact outcome, wishing for. There was a change, not just both inside and outside the Church. Catholics worldwide started to inquire queries they would never have dared to ask. Loud. Who is in charge of the Church's finances? Which voices are heard and by whom, which are not heard? Additionally, the majority of sadly, what occurs to people who too much pressure for the truth. That final it was the query that turned out to be fatal. When word leaked out in April 2024 about the father's unexpected and strange death minby, Anelman. He came from Cameroon. Clergyman and a former regional auditor for Africa Caritas. Officially, he passed away from heart arrest, yet a few days before to his death, he had sent multiple pages of records, including one that allegedly made it on its way to the private secretary of Tagle. It contained incriminating proof of theft of funds, and at least several of the 5 dashes have directees to high-ranking Vatican officials. Even some legends claim that Father, in his last message, Enembe had issued a warning. Please let me know if I don't live to testify. Recognize that the decay is more profound than anyone will acknowledge. What are your thoughts? Was this merely a coincidence or a contributing factor of a more extensive pattern? Since 2021, there were at least 3 lower-level clergy members present. Internal audits have either passed away or under peculiar circumstances or disappeared without justification. No formal inquiry has been started into any among them. If that bothers you, then you'd be shocked at what transpired a few weeks ago, and the way the decay even spread more profound than what the deceased Father Idia. Tagle is constantly cautious in his public speech, but even he was obviously shook. In a separate meeting with. According to reports, he remarked, Filipino clerics, some people believe this has to do with money. It's not at all. It has to do with souls. The sale of souls. In God's name. That one was leaked, quote, set off a chain of events that made individuals insane. Now, the public saw Tagle inside the Vatican, but as a reformer, his name was now considered taboo. Even the bishops who had commended him are now spoke of him icily, as though he were just association may lead to surveillance. And maybe it might because deep down the apostolic palace's walls, a fierce but quiet power struggle was in progress. On one side were their formers who were somehow associated with Pope Francis envisions a modest, open church. Conversely, their institutionalists, a large number of them observed Tagle's behavior as risky destabilizing. The head of this cardinal was said to be the faction. One man who was well known for how well he handled Vatican diplomacy in his cold manner. It seems that Brani had a lengthy saw Tagle as a danger, not only due in part to his popularity, but also because of his availability. As the previous leader of Caritas and the spread of Christianity, Tagle had nearly reached the dicaster, every region of the Church's worldwide framework. What do you believe would occur when a guy like Briani learns about their ports of a secret dossier that claimed to have been put together by Tagle's group and included more than 70 pages of irregularities in finances related to cover-ups and private letters? You guessed it. Yes, he would become alarmed. As said by one curial source, an unnamed individual in that faction stated that if such dossier is approved public, it would lead to a more serious problem, compared to the McCarrick affair. Now, this makes one wonder if Tagle is bluffing, since he hasn't, as far as we know, released any documents that could be used against them. However, what if they are being used as leverage by him? A few that think he's holding off until after the upcoming papal summit. The fact is that if he uses his influence, plays his cards well, as a kingmaker or as a candidate, would be decisive. However, others caution that such a tactic might not work. One person said, "He's playing with fire." Bishop from Europe. The instant he glanced like a genuine danger, they'll ensure that he either literally or symbolically vanishes. An additional unsettling truth is that the Pope is in a very challenging position. Both Tagle and Francis have a close relationship, as both are people-oriented, pastoral, and having similar opinions about migration, climate justice, as well as economic disparity. However, Francis is also a product of Vatican politics. He is aware that pressing too quickly or too much could cause tears. The separation of the Church. Thus, his public backing because Tagle has been turned off. He was fortunate. His actions without uttering a word, either in support of or opposition to them. In a single home, the Pope declared, "We ought to be as wise, as delicate as doves and serpents." Many took it as a covert indication to Tagle that advised to move cautiously. However, did you feel that none of this makes sense? This was a crucial issue that had taught to have shook the fundamentals of countries. However, there are no obvious ramifications. Okay, the solution is really straightforward. The majority of except for one, the facts above are accurate. Dossier in black. Was that a bluff? The response is in the affirmative. The game was really good. Played that everyone was duped. Idiot, since, according to the official reports, no such evidence of a Sucha document ever existing. Thus, how did it end up? Has Tagle lost it to the antagonists, or is there a distinct response? Get your hands dirty and watch the video until the conclusion to discover the startling response. There is no deception regarding the reality that measures taken by Cardinal Tagle that demanded openness and change within there are definitely ruffled feathers in the Church. Between some groups, additionally, it's to the point that they desire his removal. His vocal position on matters such as mismanagement of finances and a cover-up has made him a reform advocate as well as, and a goal for those who have invested in keeping things as they are. However, there's a specific problem that people don't know the reality. The rumor regarding him gathering the reports and bringing them to the public's attention was not as easy as they were supposed to be. However, another shock was in store for us right then. It took place in April 21st of 2025, around 6 o'clock morning. Time in Vatican, the bells of St. Peter's Basilica stated 13 times, not 12. Not every hour. 13. The significance was evident. The Pope had passed away. However, this wasn't merely a Pope's demise. It was the start of a storm that had previously years of subtly brewing inside the Curia's closed doors. Only days prior to passing away, Pope Francis had appeared unusually agitated. He had been getting together with folks he typically wouldn't. He spoke with Palestinians, new supporters, and publicly denounced Israeli attacks on Palestine. This startled the world, and observing how clear and it's true that he was keeping to himself, but some thought that Tagle's influence on the Pope. This wasn't the first instance of, "This is what the Pope had done." Francis has been a troublemaker for a long time. He enjoyed questioning the culture of concealment, advocating for openness in church money, as well as providing access to discussions regarding the inclusion of LGBTQ people, clergy abuse, and female deacons. There were plenty of foes. Even inside the Vatican, some individuals opposed the Pope. The reality that most people find upsetting is how he unexplainably passed away just before the papacy, which was scheduled for May 7, 2025. According to some, the adversaries managed to Tagle, according to some, lost his strong friend. However, what does the hold for the future? How can Tagle make use of to his advantage, the black dossier? Fun, huh? Fact, the black dossier's secret is that it's non-existent.